I believe that all of us can create, each one of us can create their own heaven, wherever they are. And there's no up there, down there, sideways. It's all around us, it's within us, and it's within reach. Now, I think I've perhaps got a slightly unfair advantage because in 1982 I died. And when I only once said this in public before, and it was in Australia, and a voice from the back says, "It's beginning to show." But I must tell you about it because it is relative to our perception of heaven. And bear with me, because I was 55 and I was pretty fit, and I had, on a Thursday evening, I had played a very hard set of tennis, and on the Friday morning I felt really bad enough not to go into work, and that was because I was in the rat race then, and I wasn't doing much else. And I felt so bad that I didn't go in, and I rang my doctor and I said, "Can you pop up?" Because they did that in 1982. "Do you mind popping up and giving me an aspirin or something?" And he came up, and he looked at me, and he picked up the telephone and phoned for an ambulance. And I said, "Oh, hold on, come on." But he said, "No, I think you ought to go in." And I was taken into hospital. And on the Saturday morning, the surgeon came round, a young surgeon, and his two assistants, and he poked and prodded, and they did lots of tests, and eventually, they took samples, and they did all sorts of things. And he came back, and he said, sometime during the afternoon, he said, "We don't really know what's wrong with you, but all your systems are failing. And if we don't go in and have a look, you won't last till after tomorrow." And I thought, faced with that sort of dilemma, and in the pain I was in, I thought, well, please go ahead, and I'll cut this long story as short as I possibly can. But it was a traumatic experience, and it did alter my entire way of thinking and way of living. And they did the pre-med, and they put me on the trolley, and I was very vague, and they whistled me down. And I met what I thought was a butcher with a butcher's apron and a big beard and a cigar, and there were stainless steel ovens and steam coming out. And I thought, oh, look where I've gone. And it was obviously an anaesthetist and all the machinery that was around. And he prodded me, and I heard vaguely saying, "How heavy are you?" And I thought, this is nonsense. What do you want to know for? But anaesthetists have to know. And the next thing I was aware of was opening my eyes and the young surgeon taking his mask off and turning to his two assistants and saying, "Pity we were too late, chaps." And I thought, this is extraordinary, because I had my full faculties. I thought I was perfectly normal, and I was about to say, "Hi, fellas, And I realized that I wasn't looking at him from the table, I was looking down. And I saw him going, chatting, and you know how they take the gloves off and they do the taps, and I looked down again, and I saw myself lying down on the table, and the staff cleaning up and putting lights out, things like that. And I thought, well, this is extremely odd. And I wasn't frightened, I wasn't disturbed, I wasn't worried, but very, very curious about the whole thing. And there was a moment of regret when I looked at this body on the table, and I thought, it was a pleasant, good body, it was good to me, but I've had to leave it now, and there was a little touch of regret. But there was nothing else. There was no fear, there was no concern about leaving this earth, because there was a feeling that there was much more going to happen, and it was going to be at least very interesting. And gradually there was a sort of mist formed round, and there was a time of total peace and total nurturing and total love. No coercion to do anything at all, and it was just a beautiful place to be. And I was just thinking about and able to, at all my faculties, and I was able to consider what I had been doing and whether it had any value, any real value. And very gradually the mist started to form into a form of tunnel. Now this was in 1982. I had not ever read any experience like this. I'd never heard of it. And I know that hundreds of thousands of people have done it since. But this was quite unique to me. And my tunnel formed, and because probably I was an engineer, The tunnel was made up of big aluminium sheets with rivets around the corners. You would appreciate that. And there were great sheets, and there was another one behind, and there was peach lighting behind. Now, this is wonderful. And I realized I wasn't me. I was a long tube with rounded ends, and I was in the middle of this thing, just sitting. And I had all the time, not time. There's no perception of time at all. I was just nurtured and totally loved, and I didn't have to do anything or go anywhere or really think about anything. And I became aware, or this tube became aware, that right at the end of the tunnel there was a sort of light. And as soon as I was aware of it, I felt it moving very slowly along. And it came to rest just before the light. It wasn't a bright light. And I was aware of getting out of this thing. I wasn't the tube anymore. I was a totally innocent, something like a 4-year-old child, probably the symbol of innocence. And I went towards this light and sort of looked around the corner. No fear at all, but curiosity. Looked around the corner, and there was the language is so difficult now because anything you say is trite about these experiences. And I looked around the corner, and there was apparently a Carrara marble floor. That's the nearest I can get to it. There were vague architectural shapes, there were moving colours, and there were the presences of the most beautiful, benign beings who understood exactly how I felt. And they were probably us, most of them were probably us at a higher vibration. And they said this is, or in effect they said, this is the gateway to an altered level of being. And these are some of our concepts, and if you feel you can understand them, if you feel you can contribute to them, you are welcome to come in. And here are the experiences of all your lifetimes to make your judgment. And they sort of they were there, certainly, but they left me alone. And again, I had all the time in the universe because time didn't exist. And I lingered for a while, and I looked at these concepts, and I just hadn't the language to describe the delicacy of their perceptions. We don't have this language here. I certainly don't. And eventually, it wasn't direct communication, it was a mental communication with them. And I said, and I looked at my lifetime and what I had done, and I said, I don't think I've done anything worthwhile. I think I'll have to go back. And I realized from that moment that the universe is full of humor, because I could almost see them nodding and smiling and saying, yes, I think you should. So I got back into that. Incidentally, I've missed a terribly important bit out. It was the evening before I had the operation. I had a talk to a wonderful Irish night sister who talked to me quite openly about dying. And she was truly wonderful because she had seen it so often, and she knew exactly how I felt. And she left me after half an hour totally happy that whatever happened, I could cope with it. She was quite amazing. Now, I got into this great big this tube thing with the round ends, and went hurtling down the tunnel. And I knew that I had no regrets about leaving, because I knew I'd be back without any question at all. So I wasn't worried about coming back in. I wanted to find out a bit more so that I'd qualify to come do something important when I came up. And I saw the end of the tunnel. I knew it would be painful, and it looked like great big shards of glass that I had to go through. And in the event, it went whoomph right through it, and there was no pain at all. And the next thing I was aware of was some very, very, very distant voice, and somebody tapping on the outside of this body I had, saying, "Is there anyone in there, Mr. Miller?" And I tried to say, yes, do you know where I've been? And I couldn't do anything, because it was just pure trauma. Now, the bit that I can't confirm was that I was in a ward of 7 people, apparently, and the chap next door to me said that I came back after a 7.5-hour operation and was put in the bed, and the curtains went round, and they were preparing me for the morgue. And so obviously it had been life-threatening. And apparently this Irish night sister apparently was passing and came in and ran her fingers through my hair. and got a reaction. This is the story I got. I can't corroborate this. And they came in with a boom from the machine and all of that. And anyway, the long and the short of it is I did survive. But I came back with a completely different set of values. And I came back with this certain knowledge from these people that even in our density, we are capable of reaching their level of perception. The trouble is that we have restrictions in our thinking that prevent us doing it. Our problem is that the restrictions and the pressures imposed by all the people we've come across, the social, political, money controllers, makes it very difficult for us to move beyond the barriers of our thinking at the moment. These barriers are now fiercely defined by family and ethnics and nations, and now I'm afraid the accountants, the money, the power people in the world who actually make decisions that affect our lives very deeply. And some of us, many of us, have very, very strong convictions, and all of these are based on, and they depend on where people were born and what their families and their teachers told them. Now, I think in this lifetime, on this planet, we can reach into heaven by finding a place on earth, preferably where there's a crossing point of the whispering energies, which allows you to relax and to breathe deeply, to tune into the rhythms of the earth, and through them to the harmony of the universe, because we have a direct connection. So in a place like that, the distractions of so many lifetimes of conflicting doctrinal systems absolutely disappear. And we can establish this connection with our Creator. It's a simple, direct and beautiful direct connection. Hotline to our Creator. Our essence, which is the really important bit, the bit that was in the tunnel and leaves the body afterwards, but is the permanent part. It's then in heaven, and we become a part of the creative process. These places are sacred and were recognized many thousands of years ago by the old people, who were much more closely tuned to their significance than most of us are now. The Chalice Well Gardens is one such place. And my connection with the Chalice Well started something like 15 years ago when we started writing The Son and the Serpents. And I was dowsing after... This is the Michael and Mary line, in case you don't know. And The Son of the Serpent is the name of the book. And I was following this Michael line because it was the visionary, John Michel vision of this straight line. I found it wasn't straight, it was curved. And it took something like 18 months to get as far as the Abbey here. And I chased Michael through the Glastonbury Abbey and then along the backs of the gardens of the houses in Chilcot. And I didn't know Chalice well. Along the backs of the gardens at Chilcot, and finally came in and paid my way into the gardens, in fact, and was treated very courteously and given a little book to guide me around. It was wonderful. And I found Michael coming in. I call him Michael now because we're old friends, the Michael Energy. And he came in through the box hedge and through the King Arthur's court. I went out through the wall on the other side. Now, it was about 6 months later when we had discovered the Mary line, because at that time I was tuned totally to the Michael line. And if you're tuned in dowsing to an energy line, it is a particular band of frequencies. It's like a chord. And if you're tuned absolutely to that, you don't find anything else. So I must have crossed Mary 1,000 times on the way out, but didn't find her because I wasn't tuned to her. But anyway, we followed her up, and I found her crossing the Michael on the altar at the Abbey. And she shot across the road there, and to my great joy, because I thought she was going to miss this place and go straight up to the top, she went up the Chalice Hill and did a terrific curve down, started coming down towards the well. In fact, she comes through the well, comes through the Lion's Head, and meets the Michael line on the step down into the courtyard in King Arthur's court. And it's a magical place now. And actually, a little aside, while we were following these lines, the joining, where they joined, the nodes became much more important as people worked. Other people worked with it as well. And in King Arthur's court now, there is an earth energy manifestation of 4 it was three up to for a whole decade, it didn't change, concentric 10-pointed stars, which you can find by dowsing. And it changed, as far as I could find out, last June. I was in St. Michael's Mount waiting on some Japanese television people, and I had 2 hours to do some dowsing, and I found that actually it had changed and put a tiny little 10-pointed star in the center. So you now have 4 concentric 10-pointed stars at that point, some magical points, the most tranquil place in the gardens. And this is why people, when they sit down and contemplate and tune in there, that the energy is perfectly balanced, male, female, with this manifestation round about, and all your biomagnetic fields are soothed, and this is why you feel good, and this is why you can tune in to the earth. And as soon as you tune into the earth, you're tuning into a part of heaven, and as soon as you tune into a part of heaven, you're tuning into the entire universe, and the whole universe is connected like a glorious internet, but much, 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 much more complex. Now, in our travels researching the Earth's nervous and meridian system, Bar and I found, and we've meditated at so many sacred sites around the world, some are still recognized, some are completely forgotten, and some are really seriously struggling under the pressures of hundreds of thousands of visitors who are really all just searching for a glimpse of the illuminous, elusive, numinous experiences missing from our daily lives. And what I'm saying this because it's dangerous sometimes to have a sacred place too popular, if you like. It's not a question of preventing people coming in, but people start to come in for the wrong reasons, and they want a quick fix, and 10 quid's worth in the bus, and they'll have a quick fix in so-and-so. And this is something we have to be so careful of with Chalicewell, and obviously we are. Everything is being done to preserve the sanctity and the sacredness of this place. Now, in our travels in South Africa, in Cape Town, we had 2 or 3 days looking at the energy in Cape Town, and it was completely new. And Bar and I spent a long time. Finally, found 2 major energy lines coming in over the ocean. Don't know where from, and converging towards the top of Table Mountain. And we finally found the convergence point at the top after 3 days of messing about. Absolutely unmarked, unknown place. And there was a manifestation there which was quite stunning. It was instead of the stars we have here, it was a very beautiful 8-petaled flower, if you like. Either 8 petals or 4 landscapes, I'm not quite sure which one. Absolutely symmetrical. We had the great privilege, actually, of going up the garden route and seeing lots of animal reserves and that sort of thing. But the final thing was in Pretoria, when we had arranged for us 2 meetings with Credo Mutwa, who is the spiritual leader of the Zulus. He is quite an extraordinary man. And there's about 7 of us in the first session. He came in, he's something like 82, he has 100% recall, he has the most incredible life. And as spiritual leader of the Zulus, he knows all about their culture and all that sort of thing. And when we went in, he came in, he was a huge man, completely black, not a grey hair on his head. And he came in his red Zulu ceremonial robe and sat down, and he was just magnificent. And he leaned towards us and he said, I want you, he spoke beautifully actually, I want you to ask me questions, because if you do not ask me questions, I will talk all day on things you do not want to hear. And of course all day we just sat in awe of this man, because his life has been just an extraordinary one. And he eventually, we got on very well because he was a blacksmith. He used to make swords. And he said, when he discovered I was a blacksmith, he said, I will make you a sacred blacksmith. Blacksmiths work with fire, air, earth and water. And sacred blacksmiths work with fire, air, earth and water and spirituality. Finally, in the first afternoon, at the end of the first meeting, I said to him, we'd been working, and did he know anything about these energy lines and that they met at Table Mountain? And he looked at me and he said, I have to go now. He does that. I mean, you can, if you're the spiritual leader of the Zulus, you go when you feel like going. And the following morning, there were only 3 of us, and he didn't say anything at all, just came in, sat down, and he said, the names of these energy lines are Shango and Mao. Shango is the Zulu equivalent of Hercules, and Mao is the equivalent of the Earth Mother. And I have made a map for you. And they unfolded this hand-drawn map. He said, they come in to Table Mountain, and they go to this sacred site, which I know very well, and that sacred site, and that one, right the way up to the Sudan. I don't know where they go after that, but these are lines that we know very well. These are sacred sites that we know very well. We learned later that he had written a book about 15 years ago, giving a lot of the Zulu culture and their knowledge on medicines, their knowledge on sacred sites and things like that, and it split the Zulu people right down the middle. Half of them said, this is the time to let this knowledge be known. The other half said, we should not do that because we need to protect our sacred sites. They felt the same way as we feel possibly about Chalice Well. We want people to be free to come, but we don't want them to be destroyed. And his life actually has been threatened quite a number of times by people who do not agree what he did. And I'd said to him, why can you not just put this incredible knowledge, because when he goes, it's gone. There's no way we can get at it. Why can you put it down in on tape? And he says, I did 600 tapes, and they were stolen and destroyed by people who do not want the information out. So that the dichotomy we have about sacred sites is that we must recognize them, we must care for them very, very, very carefully indeed. Now recently we were very privileged. We were at a ceremony in the South Island in New Zealand, and we had been there for some time. We were in and out of group of people, and in the group who were going around the sacred sites were quite a number of Maori people. Particularly one called Donna, who was about 35, and she had long hair and was very quiet and had her Maori blanket around her, and she kept away from the group. And we heard her story, and she had been taken from her family by the elders about 20 years ago because they recognized that she had the knowledge of earth energy and would be able to handle the responsibility of dealing with it. And she had rebelled for a long time about this, and this is why she had come back into this group who were visiting the sacred sites to find out how people were reacting to them. And the first day I went up there, the group wasn't there, and Bar and I were there, and there is a marae at a place called Castle Hill. It's the most incredible place, South Island, almost the geographical centre of South Island. Very, very sacred Zulu place. And one of the most sacred places is the female place, the marae, where there is a pool of water surrounded by huge organic rocks. And it's the woman's place because they do the scrying with the moon reflecting and all sorts of things. And I doused this place, and there was no water in it at all. It's dusty. And there were 5 energy lines coming into it, but no particular manifestation. And the second day we were up there, after we'd had lunch and everybody had drifted away, and I was aware of Donna taking the pack from her back and taking out the sacred green Punamu stone. It's a very sacred stone to the Maori. It's the peace stone. It's one that's been taken around the world to indigenous tribes. And it seemed to me to be a very special female thing she was doing. And I went away to find another well, actually. And Bar was involved in this ceremony. And the previous day, we had looked at the centre, and Bar had put a little tiny white stone. There were lots of stones lying around in the centre where we had doused the Earth Energy Centre. And this girl, with very, very careful steps, not to hurt anything at all, went right to the centre of this place and looked down, and she moved the little stone and put the Punamu down in exactly that position. And then she had a ceremony with Bar and a number of 3 other ladies, I think, and a Maori man who appeared from nowhere. And she did something very deep and significant because we went up the following day and I was able to douse alone there. And there was an energy manifestation which was actually made a fundamental change in the whole the Earth energy system. I didn't know it well enough to know whether it had been anywhere before, But the manifestation was absolutely stunning. It was 13 feet wide, and it was a 9-petal manifestation, absolutely beautiful. And I was able to dowse it, and you can just follow the rod round and mark out where it is. And at the end of it, I arrived back precisely at the point that I started. Now, I defy anybody at any time to draw a complex thing like that and end up with perfect symmetry at one point. It is quite impossible to do. So it was palpably there. So there was somebody who is enormously capable of understanding the energy of the Earth and its connection with the cosmos. Now, the Maori have a problem. It's exactly the same with the Zulu. They have a problem in accepting their legends of their sacred sites, because their ancestors were people called the Watahai. Now, the Watahai came from Africa, from Polynesia, from Tibet, from the Far East. And they arrived thousands of years in their huge, great double wakas. And they settled the islands thousands of years before the Maoris. And the artifacts have been found which prove that they did exist for that length of time. And then, in fact, no weapons have been found from that era at all. It was a millennium of peace, with every colour or nation living together. Unfortunately, something happened in the Polynesian area, and one of the Maoris, a very new name, they were different iwis of the same sorts of people. And this particularly very aggressive, I don't know whether they had to survive under very difficult conditions, but they did become very aggressive, and they came into New Zealand, and they took over, they overpowered these very peaceful people who didn't fight, because they weren't fighting people, and they actually imposed their rule of fear, and finally murdered most of them and took over the whole island. Now, their dichotomy is that they can't accept they want to accept their ancestors. Their ancestors were the people who came to these islands that very long time ago. If they accept them, and they accept all their sacred sites, which they're now claiming, they have to accept that they actually killed their own ancestors. So there's a huge problem there. But they still relate to these wonderful ancient sacred sites that were created by the Watahai. So the sacred sites around the world are just so important, and they are subject to, almost tribal fighting to try and prove ownership. And this is precisely what they ought not to be. They ought to be places where they all get together and have a common belief system. Recent history in New Zealand, with the influx of the Europeans, of course, has blurred the edges of the legends. And I have to say that the New Zealand people now, of all nationalities, because they're a very, very mixed crowd, care a great deal for the sacred sites and for the looking after them. And a lot of really positive work is going on to preserve these hugely important sanctuaries for all times. Exactly, again, what Michael was saying earlier on. This has to be preserved. So we have to provide places where people are welcome to rest in quiet, peaceful contemplation, allowing them to commune with nature and their Creator. Challiswell is such a place, and I was deeply honoured when the trustees asked me to refurbish the wellhead. It's a symbol of the sanctity of the garden. It was a very exciting challenge, and I hope I might have made a very minor contribution to this little piece of heaven on earth.